Welcome everyone to our webinar, our August webinar. We had taken a hiatus for a couple months, and so this is our first webinar back, and we'll be having webinars through May of next year, and then we'll take another break and start up again. Today we're going to be talking about taking action to address substance use disorder in communities, clinical, community, and workforce perspectives. And my name is Michael Wilcox. I'm the Associate Director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, and this webinar today is very near and dear to my heart. I like all of my colleagues, but these four people that are going to be presenting today are people that I truly love, and so I will throw that out there. There is a big difference there. I've been working with Nicole, Erin, Sheila, and Elisa for several years now on projects related to what you're seeing there on the right and much, much more. I think Nicole will probably walk you through all of the introductions and sort of how we got to where we are today, but I'll just introduce by saying that if you go back to 2018, USDA Rural Development had the READY program, the Rural Economic Development Innovation Initiative. And back then, Erin, the brave soul that she is, worked with some other folks there at Turtle Mountain to apply to be a part of that program. And at that time, we got about 90 applications. We were able to accept about 45 applications. And it just so happened that Turtle Mountain was one of the applications that was accepted. And they had to pick a consultant out of 4 different consultants, and they ranked Purdue University last. Come to find out, but they wound up getting stuck with Purdue University, and we're so thankful that that happened. Nicole and I went out to Turtle Mountain in I guess it was November, December of 2018 when all of this began, 2018, 2019. And we were talking about a juvenile detention center. And we had a lot of discussion about a juvenile detention center leading up to our traveling out there. And we came to realize that there was a need for a juvenile detention center because of substance use disorder issues that the tribe was facing there in North Dakota. And so we wound up shifting focus and talking about recovery-oriented systems of care. And this eventually led to the development of a curriculum that Lisa will be talking to you about today. And it also led to what you're seeing here in the picture, massive, wonderful recovery facility that's currently being built. And you're going to get walked through that journey today of how we got to this point. It's a very interesting journey. I wrote a short story about it. I may throw that in the chat as well. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the team. I know that we're waiting for Nicole Adams to jump in here, and I'll try to manage that. But for now, I'll hand things off to Erin, Elisa, and Sheila. So welcome everyone to our webinar for this month.
Michael, I don't know if you wanted to introduce this slide as well.
Oh, yeah. So while we're getting started with our August webinar, we did want to take note that our next webinar is going to be on September 12th in 2023 at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be Reach, Teach, and Engage. We're really excited to have our good friend Amber Twitty from Central State University presenting work that she's been working on there in Ohio. So please do join us next month for that exciting webinar coming up in September.
Alrighty, well, we'll get started with our webinar about taking action to address substance use in communities. And I think we'll go around and do introductions first. Erin, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Belgard. I've worked for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa tribe for, it's gonna be 15 years this upcoming October. I have my bachelor's in business administration, my master's in legal studies and Native American law.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sheila Trottier. I am the Dean of Career and Technical Education at Turtle Mountain Community College. And I have been working in career and technical education and workforce training for the past 41 years. And this is an initiative that is very dear to my heart, and it's an honor for me to be here today.
And I don't know if Nicole's been able to hop on yet.
I don't see her yet.
I'm working with her on it.
Okay. Alrighty, and in that case, I'll introduce myself. My name's Elisa Warland. I'm the Community Development, Health, and Human Sciences educator here in Wayne County, Indiana. My background is in social work and worked for a number of years in mental health with a lot of folks who had co-occurring substance use disorder. So we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be sharing with you a little bit about TASC and how that is structured. TASC is a curriculum that was developed by Extension in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and it is a community approach to addressing substance use disorder that's based on recovery-oriented systems of care. Now, a recovery-oriented system of care is all of the different elements in your community that assist with substance use disorder, and they're all interconnected with each other. There are some programs that take a hub and spoke approach to this, whereas there's one agency that's the controlling piece of this whole model, and then all of the other elements connect to just that. We find that kind of problematic because those different elements need to be talking to each other. So we take a complex adaptive systems approach, which means it looks a lot messier, but it actually reflects more what's happening in the community. And here's an example of a simplified map of a complex adaptive system. So we always start on the left with our person or community member. They're exposed to substances in some way. Some people are able to stop. For some people, that turns into a substance use disorder. And then they enter this dizzying array, usually, of services where they're trying to figure out how to get towards recovery. And it's often kind of complicated. There may not be communication between all these different pieces, and it may take them a while to get there. And once they get to recovery, you've got early recovery, but you still have different needs there too. So trying to get into long-term recovery requires even more resources. It's oftentimes difficult for individuals who are going through recovery to get the resources they need. It's hard for family members. There's a lot of acronyms, there are a lot of agencies, and trying to figure out how this works is complicated. Also within TASC, so once we develop this map with the community, so we go out and we do interviews. I'm going to go back a sec. We go out and do interviews with individuals about their experiences with the recovery system, and we try to hit different sectors as well. So folks who are working in treatment, people who are in recovery, schools, law enforcement, our jail, legal services, all these different pieces to find out kind of what is happening on the ground. And then we create this map. And then there's this, well, what do we do now? Well, we take that map and we use that to develop projects with the community. And we look at kind of two different levels of assets in the community. What does the community have and what do individuals have? So oftentimes when we're doing community development, we get kind of stuck in what's wrong. What do we not have? And with TASC, we're looking at, well, what do we have to work with? Because every community does have some sort of assets. Whether that's a recovery center, maybe they have some funding, maybe they just have a group of really dedicated people who are willing to work on this. So we sit down and we use community capitals. That's one way to kind of break down assets. So we might look at our financial, built, cultural, natural, all these different capitals that we can build on. But we also look at individuals and say, what can you contribute to this? Maybe that's space. Maybe you can work on policies. Maybe you have materials. Maybe you can influence some agency to come to the table that wasn't there previously. And we really try to focus on what can you control. We try not to look at assets that we don't have any influence over. And then going into DEI and tasks. So one of the big things too, no community is a monolith. All communities have some level of diversity. I hear oftentimes in Indiana that we're all white we don't have any diversity. I'm like, even if you were all the same race, diversity goes well beyond that. We have different age groups. We have folks who are male, female, may identify somewhere else along that continuum, of different religious groups, different ages, different abilities. And then if we're looking at Native communities too, which we're going to get into a little bit more, we've got 574 federally recognized in American Indian and Native Alaskan tribes and villages in the United States. And each of those have their own culture. And even within those, if you have the same cultural community, we have different levels of enculturation. So some folks who maybe are more connected to traditional ways, maybe still speak the language. We have other folks who maybe have adopted more Western lifestyles. We have folks who are veterans, people who are two-spirit. Some people are living in Indian country, some people are living in urban areas. And so that's going to create diversity within that community as well. And then at higher levels too, we see differences between these communities. So some tribal nations have adopted the Americans with Disability Act, some have not. Some have officially recognized gay marriage, others have not. Some may have an institutional review board if you're doing research, and others may not. So you really have to look at each one individually. Substance use has also impacted diverse communities in different ways. Historically and in the present. So we've seen differences in who's using and what are they using. We see differences in access to treatment and services. So for example, in rural areas, we may have less access to services because of transportation, or there just may be fewer providers than in urban areas. We may also see differences in how society responds to use within our political, legal, and medical systems. And then also within Indian country, we see issues around jurisdiction, especially with the legal system. It's kind of a patchwork of jurisdictions that can lead to additional complications. And then data collection also comes into this. So a lot of Native communities may be smaller, so you may have issues of trying to have sample sizes that are high enough to actually get decent data. We also see issues in some of our programs with people not marking, asking people what they identify in terms of race. So they may, as default, just write someone down as white. So we're losing data about some of our communities. So this also complicates some of how we approach this. So TASC, the way we do this, it's meant to be adaptable. Each community is creating its own map of its recovery system. And since this map is based on interviews conducted with community members, it's going to reflect those values, attitudes, and beliefs of that community. So the Turtle Mountain map, for example, includes the 7 teachings. It's also going to reflect the particulars of that community, what's available there, what people are experiencing. And that's one of the really wonderful things about working with TASC, is that it's going to look differently each community, and it's going to be adaptable to that. In talking about TASC 2, one of the things that we really want to attend to is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. So myself walking into a community, there are some folks who are going to perceive me a certain way because of what I look like and how I come off. And that's really important for us as we're working with different communities. So if you have not worked with a Native community, for example, in the past, being aware of how your race, ethnicity, the way you present yourself may be interpreted there. There may also be, people may respond to you differently too based on what organization you're representing. So Purdue, like many universities across the United States, is a land-grant university, meaning it was funded under the Morrill Act of 1862. And this act sold land that was either outright stolen or acquired through unfair treaties with Native nations to fund higher education in the United States. That's not a good history for us. And this redistributed nearly 11 million acres, so about the area the size of Massachusetts and Connecticut combined. So that reputation may also precede me in some ways. When working with communities too, showing up is really important. So if you're an outsider, why should they trust you? So coming to community events and continuing to show up. and continuing to engage and work with folks is really important. Listening first to what's going on, understanding what the lay of the land is, both in terms of power dynamics and what's available, what's happened historically. As we're working in TASC 2, group agreements can be really important. How are we going to engage in this space? So for example, we're inviting folks who are in recovery to attend our meetings. There may also be folks from law enforcement who maybe they haven't had really great interactions with them in the past. There may be doctors, and there's kind of a power differential there. So how do we kind of level the playing field so people feel like they can engage with each other and have these conversations in a very open and honest manner? So we might encourage things like use first names and not titles when interacting. We may discuss how we're sharing information. We need to make sure that our meetings are accessible. So is there childcare, for example, if people need to attend? Are they at a time of day where those who are in recovery or maybe have day jobs can make it to the meetings? Things like that can be really helpful. It's also very important to understand the history of the community you're working with. This can have an outsized impact on substance use. So we see for a lot of our communities that struggle with substance use, there's a lot of historical trauma and there may be present day trauma there. Yellow Horse Braveheart describes historical trauma as cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma experiences. And these can include forced relocation, genocide, compulsory assimilation, and others, which is something that a lot of our Native communities have experienced. So understanding that history going in, so you know what you're working with, is really important. And there's a lot of present day trauma too that affects communities. We might see sexual assault, trafficking, attempts to reduce sovereignty of communities. On the same other side though, we also need to look at how have communities survived? What are they proud of? A lot of researchers, we focus on what's wrong with a community, and this can kind of deepen that self-esteem issue that may come up or feelings of shame. So we need to flip that script and actually ask, what do you have? How have you survived? What has worked for you? What traditions have you managed to hold on to? And then the last piece here, accessibility. So everyone should be able to access meetings and information. We want to reduce barriers to participation. So we talked a little bit about time, but we may also want to think about digital literacy, internet access, access to transportation. I know at least in my town, our bus shuts down at like 5 p.m. You can't get anywhere after that. So it's important for us to make sure we're aware of where we're hosting meetings and what time. Avoiding acronyms and jargon. A lot of folks working in the area of substance use disorder too are very used to using particular words from like law enforcement, treatment areas. So breaking down what those acronyms are, the jargon can also help. And then also, how are we sharing information about our meetings and what we're doing so that everyone's on the same page? So those are just some things that are around TASC. I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to share a little bit too while you're on.
Nicole is on.
Okay.
Would Nicole like to jump in?
Yeah.
I think that, so this program is based on work that we did in Tippecanoe County. And I think that Elisa has really demonstrated how adaptable this is and how an extension educator can pick this up. And she nailed it because she's done it. But it was easy for her to pick up and do because the program has been put together in such a pragmatic step-by-step way.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, we're going to turn this over now to Erin to share about Turtle Mountain and what they've been up to over there. And just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Okay, I only have 2, so we're good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am going to tell you about our journey that we had started at the late end of 2019 when we met the wonderful Michael Wilcox and the beautiful Nicole Adams. As Michael said in the beginning, we had applied for a READY grant through USDA But what he fails to mention is they picked us last. We picked Purdue last, and still we were matched together. So to me, that's destiny right there. We were talking about a detention center. I believe at that time, I had wanted a 100-bed rehabilitation facility, and Nicole and I had some very good discussion about this. And so over the course of 4 years of our journey, I did find out a lot about recovery and recovery efforts and how to include it into our work for community development or community innovation initiatives. One of the things that we had got out of our cooperative agreement was a business plan, but also Nicole worked with 5th generation or law enforcement data, or courts, IHS, and she was able to get some really amazing data. Do we need, if we were to build a center, is it needed in the community? And at the time, our demand analysis, our primary substance of misuse was alcohol, followed by methamphetamines. Opioids exist along other substances most commonly. And if we assume that each encounter is a unique person and there are no overlaps, 853 people would need treatment in our community. So just for a little demographic background, we are one of the biggest tribes with our enrolled members, but the very smallest by land base. We are a 6x12 reservation. Basically, the city of Belcourt would be our reservation, but we have around 33,000 enrolled members, half of which live in the county. So the surrounding areas would be, there's Belcourt, which is our main town. I live in Rolla, there's St. John, there's Dunseith, and there's Rolette. So we have Native population countywide. The data that we had said confirmed that a facility is needed, said that 643 people will need treatment per year here on the reservation. So our current facility is run under an IHS Master Health Program, and they have a 20-bed facility that is not
state level folks.
State regulated. They, like I said, they primarily run under funding, which is IHS. They have, they could treat about 100 people per year. So when we had said we needed a new facility, this is what we came up with our planning. We had a planning task force. We started a coalition with Nicole and Michael leading the way, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but to be sitting here, almost next month will be 1 year of construction is kind of surreal for us. It was something that we definitely needed, and something that I wanted to touch base on is, again, that why such high numbers? And it's because a lot of it is due to generational trauma. In 1924, Native Americans first became United States citizens under the Indian Citizenship Act. In 1962, Native Americans were allowed to vote. In 1968, Native Americans were finally allowed to govern themselves. So if you think about it, we've only been allowed to be Native, practice our culture, practice our traditions for 55 years. Previous to that, we ran under many different federal Indian policies. Some of them reorganization acts, some of them put us into urban areas, some of us restricted us to reservations. We were told what to do for many hundreds of years. So if there's question as to why we're so far behind with times, this is, you know, telling you a lot. There was assimilation that we had to deal with. A lot of our grandparents were sent to boarding schools. I think the percentage in 1910, 1911, 89% of Native Americans were in a boarding school. So all of our grandparents, I remember my grandpa telling the story of he met my grandma at Fort Totten boarding school, and she had the most beautiful braids and they cut them off. And at the time I was only 10 years old when he told me that story, so I didn't know what it meant, and now I do, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. So you know, we have in recent years they've been finding Native American children in boarding schools graves, unreported bodies, so we don't know how many of us we lost. So when we talk about that trauma and the generational trauma, so generational trauma is a transference of a traumatic experience or stressor from one generation to the next. So if you look at it in the way of, my grandparents went to boarding schools. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to practice culture. So anytime they did, they were reprimanded for it, either hit or in some way. So when they got home and they had, you know, children need to be nurtured. It's one of the things that we found as a society we need. So when you're raised in a very strict environment where you're not allowed to be you, you're not that loving human being. So they pass it on to their children, which would be around my parents' generation, and they pass it on to us, and it's just passed down. Even though we, you know, some people will go down a different path, some people won't. But when we talk about why are Native American population so high with substance abuse, this is one of the main reasons. So getting back to our story, so when we were working with Michael and Nicole, one of the things we had started was Recovery-Oriented System of Care Coalition. So if I look back on the specific mapping, some of it we were talking about, they fall under specific. So we saw who we should invite to the table. And once we saw who we should invite, we were able to put names down. So business leaders, healthcare providers, social service providers, educators, community members, religious leaders, law enforcement, justice system, people in recovery, substance use disorder treatment providers, elected officials, health departments, and community leaders. So we had in our community, we had some people from tribal council as representatives. We had our IHS executive director involved. We had some representatives from the college, which we'll talk to the beautiful Sheila in just a little bit. We had 5th generation tribal court. We had the chief judge. We had some peer support specialists, some grant writers. It was a very unique group. When we were picking our group, we wanted to make sure that you get a group of people that could commit. You know, even though you might be the best person to fill that position, even if you have that inkling, and sometimes people are just too busy. And, you know, you have to say, even though I think this would be the perfect fit, I think so-and-so would be able to commit to carrying out the mission. I would suggest going with that committed person, because this is something that is so important and needed, and you needed to make sure that it carries on. So we had gathered a group. Now, mind you, during a lot of this, COVID happened. So our work went to Zooms, and I have many fond stories of Michael and Nicole meeting on Zooms, and we could go for hours on that, but it kind of got slowed down. And a lot of, I think everyone knows, a lot of our meetings came to virtual. So that's why I don't mind being on a webinar, because I can't see everyone and I'm a lot more comfortable doing this. But when we did meet as a community, we were all in one huge room. We had the post that's laid out. Nicole, will you be talking about that process, or should I mention it now? Okay, so we had, as we said, we were addressing all of our recovery capitals. What we did have, we listed what gaps we had, what we needed, how were we going to fill those gaps, and it was our own unique map. And again, I recently went to a training in Indianapolis where we went over a retraining. It was a train the trainer. Highly suggest. Michael, I hope you have that available at the end or in the comments. Really great to know what's needed, because it helped us plan and our phased out approach to getting our treatment facility. So current date, we're in our 11th month of construction for Turtle Mountain Recovery Center. You could see our beautiful center right there. One of my staff members, Wiley, helped me through from the very beginning we navigated a new market tax credit transaction to pay for construction of the building. Very excited. It's slated to open next fall, but they are ahead of schedule. Like I said, we are going to be a year into construction next month, and I just feel like it's been 2 months since we broke ground, and it was such an amazing moment for all of us. We were all there together. Michael and Nicole got beautiful star quilts that I'm terrible with surprises. So I was like, what's your favorite color? But I'm not telling you why. So, which brings me to the next slide. How did we get there? We got there as, it's a big group. There's a big group of us. We had USDA, rural development along our side. We had a lot of council supporting us. We had the chairman supporting us, and we actually made it across a couple administrations. Our tribe is very unique. We do not have staggered terms. Every 2 years is an election year for them. So there's turnovers, and sometimes what might be a priority for one isn't a priority for all, but we were lucky enough to keep this as a priority. So when we had decided that it would be best to be a separate entity from the tribe, we had decided to use those prior who were used in the planning phases of the recovery center. So we have a very great board of directors. I do believe Michael says it's his best board of directors he's ever seen in his life. I mean, I'm not quoting him, but I kind of am. We have Dr. Kelly Hall, who's our board president. He wrote absolutely. She represents the K through 12. She works for the BAE. We have Robert Upton, who is our person in recovery, and he's such an amazing success story in our community on how he's a single dad of 5. I don't know how he does it, but he was definitely one in the community that you could see rose above all. So we love having him on the board. There's myself, who's been involved from the beginning, so I have the story to tell. We have Brock Baker, who is one of my favorite people in the world. He represents law enforcement and judicial court. We have our respected elder in the community who also worked in addiction at 5th generation for 20-some years, Francis Fatty Davis. We have the lovely Sheila, who you'll be hearing from in 1 minute, Sheila. And then we have Shelly Harris, IHS director, who's our healthcare rep. So when we had got the suggestions from, and I'm going to say Nicole has been our brains behind the whole operation. We can't thank her enough. When she actually told me that the center was going to happen, I believed it, and I was like, yes, and it's so great. And they've luckily been with us on separate contracts since that time, and we're keeping them till at least next year, but I want to keep them forever because they've become such close friends of ours. We greatly appreciate all of the help. And I think I'll let Sheila talk about the workforce piece behind it now.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I work with Turtle Mountain Community College. Just to give you a little bit of background on who we are. There are 36 tribal colleges in Indian Country. We are one of the original 6 tribal colleges, and we were established in 1972. Tribal college movement began in the early 70s. We are chartered by our tribe, and we are located in the beautiful North Dakota, the wooded, hilly, lake-filled area. We are the home of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and we are an accredited institution. We are also a land grant institution. In 1994, Congress granted tribal colleges land grant status, so we are a land grant institution. That's just a little bit of background who Turtle Mountain Community College is. Next slide. So how did we become part of the process for the Recovery Center? Dr. Kelly Hall used to work as the vice president of our campus, and one day she received a call from Erin and her team, and they wanted college representation at the community meeting. So when we got to the community meeting, one of the first things they start talking about is this mapping process. And through this mapping process, they were talking about the recovery system of care and how the community partners fell into the system of care. So during this mapping process, we talked about how, what is the process for recovery? And one of the gaps that we recognized was education was not part of the recovery process. So where can Turtle Mountain Community College work with not only the court system, law enforcement, and the Recovery Center to make sure that that pathway as part of their recovery and their care plan included education. What can we do to make sure that we give them hope and an idea of how they can change their career or look for something to help them rebuild their families and their life? So with that, we talked about how can we build this facility so that it supported education? And with that, Erin and Duran, who was the architect, they just, we decided that, okay, what happens if we were to bring a classroom to the care center? What happens if we were to offer on-site education so that we can get them into the pipeline of education system so that they can have hope, so they can see that they can get retraining or training and find employment and become self-sufficient and get out of that cycle of addiction. So that was our first part of how we were engaged in the process, was the mapping process to see how can Turtle Mountain Community College, who we serve anywhere from 600 to 700 students, and that includes some of our dual credit students in our community. 99% of our student population is Native Americans, specifically Turtle Mountain tribal members. So the next step of our involvement is as Erin mentioned, is we recognized a need. Turtle Mountain definitely has the need for the Recovery Center. And then the next step was, do we have the capacity to make this happen? What does our business plan? They shared their business plan with us. And we looked at their management structure, and in the business plan, they had a list of positions that would have to be, in order for the Recovery Center to become a reality, do we have the staffing pattern to make sure that we can carry this out? So that's where TMCC mainly got involved, was looking at what do we currently offer, who do we have trained in our community, so that we could have the capacity to offer, to have the staffing to oversee the Recovery Center. So at that point, we came back to the college, sat down, looked at the management plan, looked at the jobs and the roles and responsibilities they had listed in the business plan. Next slide. So with that, we did an overview of our program. We did a program assessment. What does Turtle Mountain Community College currently have? What does our graduates look like? Who do we have to fill the capacity of filling those positions? At that point, we did a curriculum review. So when we did the mapping, some of the positions that they were looking at were things like health fitness, maintenance workers, office personnel. So what we looked at is, does our current programs provide the level of education that we want our Recovery Center employees to have? So we did do some modifications to our curriculum. We involved our faculty, and every program on our campus that for career and technical education has an advisory board. So at that point, we involved our advisory boards, who are industry experts, to say, this is some of the things that need to be changed to make sure that everybody met the qualifications of the positions. We did some expansion and some enhancements of some current curriculum. Then we also looked at gaps on what we didn't offer and how we can be responsive to the needs of the Recovery Center and the future of the staffing. With that, we looked at a model called career ladder model. Under the career ladder model, we do exit points. We start with a certificate, so that's so that our students can, if after 1 year they can exit into the workforce, and then we also go into a 2-year Associate of Applied Science. We also looked at the areas where we didn't have the capacity to offer training, such as in the area of licensed addiction counselors and social LSWs, where both of those programs take an outside accreditation and is more of a lengthy process. So what we've done is we've built a human services technician program to respond to the needs of the Recovery Center. And in the curriculum for the human services technician program, we've incorporated some of the social work classes that are required at the first 2 years to transfer into a bachelor's program. It has addiction studies courses, and then we've also created articulation agreements with some of our tribal colleges in North Dakota and the North Dakota University system, so that our students can transition from our campus into and get the bachelor's that is required to fill those positions. And then once, one of the other things is once the center is fully staffed, and then we will continue to work to make sure that they have the workforce training that they need. Where we'll be providing customized training, continuing education. And then not only that, we have several people in our community who are former graduates who may be applying for these positions, and they might need upskilling training, which we call, for example, medical billing, medical coding, which we have programs in those areas. We have our construction technology program to help fill some of the needs of the maintenance workers. We have HVAC, plumbing, and in all of these areas, we just want to make sure that we are an active partner with the Recovery Center, because one of our mission is that we respond to the needs of our community, and we make sure that what we are doing helps our community grow and become successful. Next slide. So with that, one of the things that, during this process we thought about and thinking about is, looking at what the Recovery Center, one of the things that caught my attention is, with the Recovery Center, they're looking at a culturally based treatment program. Turtle Mountain Community College's mission is to have the culture and social heritage brought bear throughout the curriculum. So it's a perfect fit, so that the students graduating from our institution that go to work at the Recovery Center have had education and have the culture. One of the things that we do, Aaron talked about historical trauma. Many of our tribal members, they didn't have access to education. They were told that they could not attend higher education, that they didn't have the ability to ever get an advanced degree. So we want to make sure that those barriers are removed for all of our students. Every Monday morning at the opening ceremony we have a song, we have our smudging, and then at the end of the week, we also close with a song and a smudging. Some of the things we've incorporated this year, thinking about the whole concept of addiction, is we've remodeled our old campus, one of the buildings in our old campus, so that we can provide AA and NA meetings to our community. We have a building that is off campus that is designated for our community. So there is a referral service. And right now they offer meetings 3 days a week. In the fall, our students will be putting in a sweat lodge on our campus as part of a system of healing for our students. And we have our cultural fair. We incorporate culture every day into our campus and our courses. We offer our language courses to our community, just to make sure that, and the whole idea with this partnership is, so that when you hire your employees for the Recovery Center, they understand the culture, so that when the patients come in or the clients come in, they can also experience that through the people that we've trained in our programs. So this has been an exciting adventure. Turtle Mountain Community College is very excited about this. We have so many students who have come from a background of addiction, we want to make sure that we can provide them with access to education. And also, if something happens, we can provide them with the referrals so that they can get the care they need. So this has been an exciting adventure, and it's been a pleasure working with Nicole and Michael, and of course, working with Erin. Erin serves on one of our advisory boards, and she's a very active member of our campus, and we really appreciate that. So that's pretty much what, how we became involved in the process of the Recovery Center.
Okay, I think we're at the point where we can take questions now.
People should feel free to raise your hand if you wish, and then unmute, or you may put questions into the chat.
Yeah, one of the things I had forgot to mention was another thing that Purdue University worked with us on was creating a cultural campus, and a healing forest was one of them, which we put the seven teachings throughout the trails, and we have a little outdoor stage where the clients could go reflect, do some one-on-one sessions. We want to have sweat lodges, teepees, medicinal gardens. So we have a lot of great plans. We do have currently 6 recovery residences that we're running the outpatient program. We have a small outpatient program with 3 staff members who are we got Medicaid billable going for outpatient services. So we were able to get that license before the residential opens. So we're ahead of the game on that one. Any questions?
I'm Dr. Ramanitharan from Central State University Extension. I don't have a question, but Dr. Wilcox contacted me, I think, a couple of years ago. I don't know it's about this project or not. That time I was very much new to Extension. I did not have any Extension experience. But however, my comment is it's a good work, great work. That's all I want to say. This is something that I'm always interested to mental health and substance misuse prevention. But now I am mostly working on chronic disease prevention part, and also Central State University is located in Ohio, and we are, very, very new, or the newest 1890 land grant institution. So we are growing with the help of our other land grant institution, that is Ohio State University. I am part of Family and Consumer Sciences. I don't have any questions, but I just want to say it's a great work.
Can I just respond really quickly to something you said that just sparked something? So a lot of people do a lot of great work on prevention, and prevention absolutely fits into the coalition work. It fits into the map. We usually start the maps with youth. And so all the work around prevention with youth ends up on the maps around the youth there. And anywhere else that prevention activities happen, it can show up on the map. But we don't focus on only prevention, because I found a lot of smaller coalitions, they want to work with kids and do prevention only. And they ignore the adults who are struggling, who are also the parents of the kids that they're trying to reach with prevention. And so we kind of focus a little more on making sure that the adults have services, because that trickles down as another form of prevention as well. Like I said, we don't ignore prevention. Those activities continue on and are very important as well, but it's important also to branch out a little bit. And so that's kind of what we do in this work.
Thank you for that, Nicole. We do have 2 questions. The first question is from Rita Gillis in Lake County here in Indiana. And she asks, who are the major funders? And so I guess I'll start out by saying that the initial funding to initiate the process came from USDA Rural Development through that READY program that I mentioned. But once we got that off the ground and we started working with Erin and Sheila and everyone else, Turtle Mountain was very entrepreneurial, and I guess I'll say in terms of bringing in funding. And so, Aaron, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about all the different funding mechanisms that you've been able to employ over time. We don't have enough time to get into the new market tax credits and all the craziness associated with that, but that's partly how the center is being built. And then for the curriculum, that was developed through funding with the North Central Cooperative Extension Association. The extension directors awarded us a $100,000 grant to develop the TASC program. So Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about the different funding streams that you've been able to use to not only retain us, but to get everything done?
Yes. So for the construction of the building, like I said, we utilized the new market tax credit allocation, where we had 2 CDE entities that put us in their pipeline for healthcare facilities. Midwest Minnesota out of Detroit Lakes, and we had Bremer Bank. Bremer Bank is also an investor in the project, and we got our source loan from Native American Bank. It was actually pretty, and I'm gonna toot our horn here. We were mentioned in the vice president's speech about expanding access to capital to Native Americans, and this project was specifically listed, so it was pretty exciting. It's a $19 million project. The tribe contributed $5 million through ARPA funds. We had some fundraising efforts through Northwest Area Foundation. We had Otto Bremer contribute. We had a grant through BJA COSAP, which I think they changed the name to COAP now, which funds our outpatient facility, $600,000 over 3 years. So we were able to hire some staff that will move over to the building.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Aaron's worked incredibly hard on keeping the funding coming, and we've been very creative and aggressive in making sure that there's enough resources available to make the dream, to keep the dream alive, if you will. One of my favorite people, Tessa Garrow from Health and Human Sciences at Purdue University, has a question. Can you share some examples of how you overcame any resistance to the different structural approach of TASC to the models that have historically been used in the US? That sounds like a Nicole or Elisa question, if you want to go for that. And thanks for the question, Tessa.
So I'll talk a little bit about getting started with TASC in a community. The introductory meetings, we talk about why we use the complex adaptive model to kind of diagram a community rather than the hub and spoke model. Hub and spoke is a fairly weak model from a systems engineering perspective. It tends to be very exclusive. It tends to be run by organizations. When you're working with a community coalition, when you're doing that grassroots work, the complex adaptive system just does a much better job of diagramming how a community actually functions. And that's really clearly explained with like some really obvious reasons why this works better for those grassroots coalitions. We work with coalitions that want to do this. So, and so they generally, you know, the communities we're working in, they've come and said, we want to do this. Can you give it to us? Can we start it up? And that's how we've worked with them. I think Elisa has some really great examples of what to do when stakeholders don't want to work with you and how the work can proceed and how the stakeholders eventually do show up. And I am going to have to go because I do have another class. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and you can always email me if you have additional questions, and I'm happy to meet with anyone one-on-one if you want to talk about this more. But I'm going to let Elisa talk because I think she's got really great experiences in that area.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Yeah, one thing, so I was on the team that helped create the curriculum for TASC, and one of the things that I noticed even while researching this, SAMHSA and some of these other agencies talk a lot about recovery-oriented systems of care. They don't really explain how that works, like how you make one. So I think that was one of the big things that in TASC, we kind of give you the tools to look at, you know, who's at the table with your coalition currently, who else ought to be here, how can you reach out to them, bringing new folks in, and then explaining this whole complex adaptive model system, and then beginning to do this work. So I think that is a big piece of that. And I think also, at least locally, I don't feel like this has been too hard of a sell either, because so many of our agencies recognize that we are siloed. That was something I heard constantly when I first started working in my community, was that we're not talking to each other enough. So saying this is going to be a model that's going to help us figure out where we need to have more communication and look for those gaps and who's attached to those. That was something that was really appealing to a lot of our providers who are frustrated and burned out and want to see more movement on this. And I think we've been pretty successful in Wayne County in actually moving the needle in some ways. So
I'll add just very quickly that what I learned from Nicole here in the Tippecanoe County experience was it's not a hub and spoke, it's complex adaptive system, but they had the key part of it was having the non-stakeholder facilitator. And for Tippecanoe County, that was United Way. And as I understand it from hearing the history of it, United Way reiterated over and over and over again that this isn't ours, it's yours, but we want to help facilitate it. And because everyone felt like they belonged, they felt like they were included and that they were equals at the table, it just fostered this environment where different organizations and institutions would come and go, or they were maybe intensely involved at one point and less intensely involved at another point. I think that has a real selling feature to it, because we see, if you will, on the side of the road, so many ROSC, recovery-oriented systems of care, that have fallen apart because the hub essentially chose to dissolve it or walked away from it. So while in theory the hub and spoke makes a lot of sense, it's actually quite a fragile system compared to the complex adaptive system, and much more inclusive.
I also think one thing Nicole tends to emphasize too is we're not here to take over your coalition. Like, we're here to give you some tools so that your coalition will be more functional. And I think that's also very important, because people are afraid of losing control over things. So I think emphasizing that we're here to assist and give you a way to move forward that might be more functional, I think is also very key. We also had a question here. Can this group help create a SAMHSA tip manual for Native specifically? And there is some work going on in the background so that we have at least a cultural guide to implementing TASC with Native communities that we're eventually will roll out.
Aaron, you may SAMHSA came and visited us, didn't they? At the
groundbreaking?
Yeah, at the groundbreaking. Yeah. And what were some of your takeaways there?
They have a lot of great information. We're actually we applied for a homeless grant under theirs as well. So it's I can send that my email, and if you want to reach out to me, she has to jump off. We could talk about a culturally appropriate one.
Yeah. And I'll save the chat to Aaron and share it with you.
Okay. Sorry, I got sloppy fingers. I added an H at the end. There's no H. So.
Great. Well, it's 3 o'clock, and I just want to appreciate our speakers, Aaron, Sheila, and Elisa, and Nicole. You guys, as always, did a fantastic job. We're looking forward to getting back up there again to see you guys and see all the progress, and looking forward to our next board meeting as well, of course. As Shelley has said, the webinar recording will be emailed to everyone, and we just greatly appreciate your interest in this. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Aaron or Elisa, Sheila, or Nicole. And with that, we'll see everyone again next month at our next webinar in September. Take care and have a wonderful rest of the month, and stay cool.